Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another chapter of Experiencer Interviews. And today we've got another amazing story, this time coming from across the pond. We have Robert Hulse on board today. Robert is a 71-year-old widower living in Macclesfield, England. From early childhood to the present day, Robert has experienced contact with several types of beings from other worlds. On the 28th of December, 1980, together with his wife and two young sons, Robert stood less than 150 feet below a huge disc-shaped craft hovering above him on a quiet country road near his home. This event rekindled memories of childhood encounters and began more than 40 years of research into subjects such as the crop circles, abduction, and animal mutilations. Much of this has been done with his dear friend and research colleague, David Caton. He has spoken on these subjects both in the UK and in Australia, and has been interviewed at length on the radio programs and appeared in documentaries including the film Capel Green. He was also featured in the recent Y-Files episode titled Crop Circles and the CIA, which has almost 4 million views and nearly 20,000 comments. Some of Robert's own crop circle film was also included in this episode. For more information on Robert and his contact details, please visit his website. So thanks for coming on. Let's start off from the beginning. Can you tell me when everything started off for you?
Yes, indeed. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. My first encounter was when I was between 2 and 3 years old, I guess. And I was in a cobbled street, old cobbled street in Macclesfield. My mum had just brought me out of my auntie's house and put me on the pavement. And she'd gone back in to get my younger sister. And as I stood there on my own, a light came down into the street. It was shaped like a large light bulb with the bulbous part at the bottom. And it was like a yellowy white light. It wasn't tremendously bright or difficult to look at. I saw it actually descend and come down into the street from the sky. And it hovered in front of me. I don't know, perhaps 6 feet away and maybe 5 feet off the ground. And after a while, it just dissipated. It didn't go anywhere. It just dissipated. And so that was my first encounter. It was very obviously coming to have a look at me. That was clear, you know. So they knew me from early on, for sure. The next one was when I was about 5 years of age, and I was in a field about 50 yards from my home, and I was sat under an old oak tree trying to make a bird's nest out of the hay and straw and the mud that was under the tree. And I was making an awful job. But the next minute, these two people appeared at my side, and they were about 5'6" or so tall, and they were dressed in a silver one-piece suits. And I know they spoke to me, but I can't remember what it was they said. And then the next second, they'd gone. And I found myself walking back to the bungalow, but in my hands was a perfect bird's nest. And I could never have made that. So, you know, that was another encounter with them, I'm sure. Then the next one was when I was 7, and my sister Jane was 5. This kind of thing runs in the family. Both my sisters have had experiences. My niece, my nephew, my mother, my grandmother. My mum didn't tell me until I started talking to her when I was about 40 about this. And then she confided in me that she'd had experiences all her life. And they continued at least until she was 80 years old. And also my grandmother used to talk about seeing goblin-like people at the bottom of the bed playing with her feet. So Another thing is that with people like us, we often people who are connected with the ETs have usually have psychic ability. That seems to be one of the things that draws them to us, and also I'm quite sure have the ability to enhance that psychic ability, which I believe they've done with me and other friends of mine. Excuse me. So yes, when I was 7, my sister was 5. We were on holiday in Prestatyn in North Wales, in a old rented caravan on an old site where there were all the chalets were hand built, by the people, made out of bits and pieces. It was a bit primitive, but this day. My parents and my sister and I went just up through the sandhills onto the beach, and we were playing, and it was a lovely day, sun shining, beautiful. And my dad said he was going, that they were going back to the caravan to make something to eat, and I asked if we could stay a bit longer. So he said yes, half an hour and no more. Well, my dad was very Victorian in his attitudes, very strict. So we behaved ourselves, and we would certainly have been back within half an hour. But what happened was we played for a little while longer, and then the next thing that happened is that we found ourselves not on the beach, but on the single concrete track that ran through the site. And it was much later in the afternoon. It was raining on us. My sister even remembers the clothes she was wearing. She's got a much better memory than I have about these things. And she remembers them getting wet. Anyway, we were disorientated. We'd no idea how we'd got there and what had happened. And finally, another family took us in and went to look for my parents. And when they found them, they were so relieved to see us because we'd been missing for 4 hours. And we'd no idea where we'd been or what had happened to us. So we couldn't explain, it's a very difficult situation, really. But anyway, we completed the holiday. And then when we came home, after a few days, I had these terrible nosebleeds, which I'd never had before in my life, and I've never had them since. But for this week, it might have been longer than a week. Every time I went to wash my face in the sink and throw water on my face, if I touched my nose, it would bleed really badly. So I'm thinking I probably had an implant put in at that time. So that was then. And then when I was 9 and Jane was 7, we were on holiday again at a place called Llandudno. It's a holiday town in North Wales. And it's only about, 7 miles away from Prestatyn, where we'd had the first encounter 2 years before. We were staying in rented accommodation, and suddenly Jane and I found ourselves. Well, let me explain. Llandudno is famous for this huge limestone rocky promontory, which goes out into the sea. And there's a road which goes all the way around it, which must be 1.5 miles, I would think, in length. And then the road, there's a wall by the road, and then the land drops off right down to the sea. And that must be about 100 feet down to the sea. So all of a sudden, from being in the digs, as we call them in England, which is the rented accommodation when you go on holiday, Jane and I found ourselves down at the bottom of the cliffs by the sea, and we had no idea how we got there at all, and Jane remembers seeing a carousel-like object floating on the water and turning round. And I guess it had lights on it, so that's what reminded her of a carousel. And but I got the impression that we would have to climb up the cliff, otherwise the tide would come in and we'd be drowned. I think that was just an impression that I was given, because I don't think we were really ever in any danger. So anyway, so Jane and I climbed up the cliff, and it wasn't terribly steep in places. I wouldn't want you to get the wrong idea, but it was steep enough. And I managed to get Jane over the wall, but I made the mistake of looking down, and I froze. I've never been really good with heights. And anyway, Jane managed to get me over the wall, coaxed me over, and we stood on the road, and we'd no idea what we should do. So we thought, well, we better start walking back towards Llandudno along the road. And we only walked a few paces when we were back in the rented accommodation again. So it's quite clear that we were being closely monitored at all times. And I don't really think they would have allowed us to come to any harm, but it was a bit of an ordeal. And I think part of a toughening up experience, so that if we met the ETs later in life, which both of us have separately, then we perhaps wouldn't be quite so frightened, So that was that. Then I don't really remember anything major happening in my teens, although with these things it probably did, and you just don't remember. And it wasn't until I was 29, when we were driving home from Macclesfield, shall we say, to Congleton, where we lived at that time. This was 28th of December 1980, that I saw. I came around a sharp bend by the canal, and I saw in front of me this red light hovering not too high up, maybe, I don't know, 100 to 200 feet, I guess. But it must have been, I don't know, 3/4 of a mile further up the road. And I knew straight away it was something odd. I knew it wouldn't be an aeroplane, because that location is surrounded by high hills, and there's no way an aeroplane would fly there at night, because this was about 9 o'clock in the evening, and it was dark, obviously, December, and I knew it wasn't a farmer in the field with a red lantern, because it was just too big. So I watched it as far as I could, and then came to the twisty wooded section where I lost sight of it. And then we came out of the wooded part, and there was a straight. And at the end of the straight, I just had the feeling that it was going to be somewhere around about there. So there was at the time a lay-by just there. It's not there anymore. But I pulled into the lay-by, and let me explain. My wife was following me in her car with our youngest son in the car. I had our older son with me in my car, and but he was only about 5, something like that, I think. So anyway, as soon as I got into the lay-by, I jumped out of the car and I looked up, and there it was, hovering right above my head. And it blotted the sky out. In the intro, we said perhaps 150 feet above my head. I think it was probably lower than that. I'm guessing the craft was about 90 feet in diameter, a disc with a completely flat bottom and a domed top. Though at this moment in time, I didn't know anything about what was on top of it because I could only see the underside. And I remember looking up at it, and it was completely silent at this point. And it was like looking up a big sooty tunnel. The blackness was blacker than the sky. And I could only see a little bit of the sky all around the rim of the craft, in between the bottom of the craft and the top of the hills. There was a piece of sky visible around, you see, and I could see a few stars twinkling there, but the rest of it was blotted out because this thing was so low. And then I'm pretty certain that there was what should we say, a discontinuity of time, because 1 second it's right there above me, the next second it's maybe I don't know, it's still only about, I don't know, 200 feet away from me, but it's gone over the field more. It's not quite so much over the road. And at this point in time, it's making a very deep rumbling, roaring sound, but it wasn't unpleasant on the ears, which, any conventional aircraft, you would have been deafened if something was that big and that low. But this was not unpleasant. And at this point, I could make out that there were windows, or it seemed that there were windows all around the bottom rim of the craft. And I could see the dome, just about see the dome on top, and I counted the windows, and then it started to fly off very slowly. It didn't go up in the sky; it was horizontal, and it went off towards Macclesfield. And as it flew, I realized that this was an incredible moment in my life, and I might never have this experience again. I knew it was not from this world. It wasn't anything that we had. I mean, I was always very interested in science and technology, so I had a pretty good idea the level of what we'd achieved aeronautically, So as it flew away, I thought, this is so important. I've got to get as much detail as I possibly can. And so I counted the windows 3 times. And later I was so pleased that I did, because there were 11.5 windows visible from a side-on view. And then, of course, obviously they carried on around the other side of the craft. My wife by that stage had driven into the lay-by with me, and she stood on. She didn't stand quite underneath it like I did, but she watched it fly away, and she didn't say anything. But I know it frightened her, made her feel very uncomfortable, that really was the start of a lot of problems in our marriage, because when one person has experiences and is desperate to find out more information about it and about what's happening to oneself as well, because I discovered that I was an abductee as well, or contactee, or whatever you'd like to call it. It caused a lot of problems. She was afraid, basically, and she didn't want to know anything about it. So I virtually ended up living a double life at home. I was married for practically 40 years, and for many of those years we struggled, but eventually, the last couple of years of her life, we were very happy. But it required me to virtually have a nervous breakdown and leave home, in order for some sense to dawn, if you like, some realization about how much she loved me and wanted me back, and so the last couple of years were very happy until unfortunately she got cancer, and after 2 months of finding out that she had cancer, she'd passed. I've seen some heartache in my life, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about my experiences. Just going back to the UFO in 1980, 28th of December 1980 is a very important date because it marks the exact date of the Rendlesham Forest incident at the Woodbridge, Bentwaters rather, US Air Force Base, and so I also discovered that within just a few days of my sighting, there were another, I don't know, 4 or 5 good sightings, very good sightings, just within, what shall we say, 5 or 6 miles of where I live. So it was a very busy time.
Before that, for seeing that UFO, did you totally forget what happened to you as a kid?
I didn't really totally forget it, but I got married when I was 21. Jenny was 19, and we had so little money. I was working my socks off just to keep a roof over our heads. Really, we within 2 or 3 years we had 2 sons, so we had that added joy. And so for the next I don't know, maybe 8 years, I was just working my socks off. And of course, in your teenage years, you have other things on your mind, don't you? So it was always there in the background, but it wasn't until this major encounter that I realized that I had to take a proper look at what had gone on in the past. I guess I always knew that I was different, and I didn't want to be. I always wanted to be a part of the gang and to be totally accepted. I was well liked, but it was almost as if they knew there was something odd about me, which made me a little bit separate. And that's, well, I've been odd all my life since then.
Yeah, same for me. Growing up was difficult, and connecting with other people was also difficult until I realized that other people were like me out there. And that's when everything changed.
Yeah, absolutely. I've made so many wonderful friends worldwide through this. I met people like John Mack, Bud Hopkins, Linda Moulton Howe, crikey, loads and loads and loads of people, and friends in Australia. Just so many good memories that I've had. Yeah.
Did you talk about your experiences? I think you were in a pram.
Oh yes, well, that was something a little unusual. Some people remember even being born. I've got a friend who remembers, well, Kate Thovalson, who you've interviewed before, she remembers being born, and also my friend Gary in Australia remembers it too. Now I don't, but I do remember being very young in my pram, perhaps I don't know, a couple of months old, maybe 3 months old, and one of my aunties peering down into the pram and talking to me in baby language, goo, 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 ga, 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 and all that kind of thing. And I remember looking up at her and thinking, you stupid woman, I know English perfectly well, and feeling so frustrated that I couldn't speak to her because I didn't have the means, But it was weird, that feeling of frustration. And so I'm guessing that's something that came with me from a past life, of which we've all had many past lives, and we will have many more to come.
Do you recall the two individuals that came to you when you built that nest?
Oh,
Do you recall what type of hair they had, what color, and if anything unusual was with their eyes?
no, I honestly can't. I have a feeling that the silver suit they wore actually covered their head. It was tight fitting, like something like a top cyclist, racing cyclist might wear, that kind of thing. But in those days, I mean, that would be 1957. They didn't have such things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did anything come to you as a kid while you were, let's say, in a cot, a bed?
Oh, crikey. Oh, yeah. I had my incident with the African elephant. Yes, which
What?
I'll never forget. Again, actually, I was round about that age, about 5, perhaps. I was in bed, and all of a sudden, at the bottom of my bed, off to the side, was a huge bull African elephant's head. It had massive gleaming white tusks, and its head was swaying from side to side like this. And I was absolutely petrified. And at first, I couldn't speak. And eventually, I managed to squeak some cries out to my mum, who was in the next bedroom with my dad. And eventually, she came and she stood in the doorway. She didn't come into the room. And it was as if she sensed something was really, really wrong. So I looked at my mum and I looked at the elephant. And then I looked back at my mum and I looked back at the elephant. And I thought, my mum's real. That's real. And but it was at that point that it started to dematerialize. And so then my mum came in and she got into bed with me and comforted me. I don't know. I must have told her what I'd seen and why I was so frightened. And she said, well, never mind. Let's pretend we're going to Blackpool, which is a famous holiday resort here in the north of England. And we're going to go on the donkeys, she said. So we're going for a donkey ride. And so she put me in that frame of mind where I was on a donkey being walked up and down Blackpool beach on the sands. And that seemed to do the trick. But I never forgot the bull elephant. It was incredible. It wasn't a nightmare at all. It was a visit from a very powerful being indeed. And I believe that being has been with me throughout my life in some way, because many years later, I was at some friend's house down in Newport in South Wales, and 2 other people had come to the house, and I was showing them some of my crop circle stuff on my laptop. Now, my friend David, whose house it was, is incredibly psychic after having been taken himself. Both himself, his wife, and two young daughters were taken as they were driving down the M5 motorway one night. And from that moment on, they all became gifted, shall we say, incredibly gifted. And that's a huge other story. But on this occasion, I was showing these friends stuff on my laptop, and after they'd gone, David said, "You weren't on your own." Sorry, they weren't the only ones who were interested in what you were showing them. You had several people behind you in sort of spirit form, I guess, and they were very interested in what you were saying. And but he said one of them was really strange because he had an elephant's head. And his name, he said, he gave me his name. It was crying out loud, the Indian elephant god. Oh, crying out loud! How could I forget that? Ganesha.
Okay, so
yes, absolutely. So I believe I've had a connection, shall we say, with Ganesha all through my life, and I'm quite sure it still continues to this day. But what else can I tell you about?
what happened after that saucer UFO incident?
Well, what happened was I had a carpet and upholstery cleaning business at the time, and I would be in people's houses doing cleaning the carpets and suites and what have you. And one house I was in at lunchtime, I stopped to have a sandwich and a drink, and I've always been keen to have a look in people's bookshelves, just to see what kind of books they're reading, you know. And I saw one on UFOs, so I pulled it out, and there were full color pictures, you know, of these things. But I turned it and found the identical craft to the one that I had seen on the Leek Road going out of Macclesfield with the 11.5 windows. I was absolutely shocked. And I discovered that this was a genuine photograph taken by Paul Villa, who lived in Albuquerque in New Mexico. And he took several photographs of this craft. And Timothy Good actually went to see him and interviewed him about this series of photographs. And apparently he told Timothy that they weren't windows around the craft. They looked like windows, but they were actually ports of some kind which glowed, which you know, I could accept quite clearly. But if you count Paul Villa's windows on his or ports, you'll see there's 11.5 from a side-on view. And I did report it about, I don't know, 6 months later to Bufora, which is a British UFO research thing over here. And so I managed to get my report sent back to me a couple of years ago. So I have the proof that I did do that, you know, at the time. So that sparked my interest, and you know, I got interested in the crop circles as well. Eventually, mainly through my friends David Caton and Roy Dutton, who was both worked for British Aerospace. David was head of non-destructive testing of airframes there, and Roy Dutton was involved in research into advanced space-based weapon systems and the Blue Streak missile, which there's loads of stories about that as well. But Roy in particular was one of the early crop circle researchers with Colin Andrews and Pat Delgado, and so what happened, how I met Roy, was that I was looking for somebody to talk to about these things, and I saw an article in the local newspaper, and it was Roy that had written it, and so I asked if I could go and see him, and we became the greatest of friends right until his death just 2 or 3 years ago. But this is what happens with us older UFO researchers. We start losing our friends later on in life, don't we? But we've had great times together. I actually didn't go down to Wiltshire to look at the crop circles until 1990. I beg your pardon, until 2000. My friend Dave Caton talked me into it, and so we went down there and saw my first crop circles. Dave had been down in the early 90s doing this study, but I got hooked, and I realized that here was a real phenomena, that it was connected to the ETs. The majority of crop circles have always been, say always, in the last 30 years at least, man-made. I was in the crop circle with David when Colin Andrews was being interviewed by the BBC. There was only them and us in the crop circle, and Colin made the famous remark that less than 5%, or perhaps 5% of them are genuine. The rest are man-made. And we were shocked at this when we heard it, because we were sort of going along with the euphoria of the crop circles. But as we learned more, we realized that Colin was completely correct. And we became quite unpopular, David and I, because we researched it properly. We weren't blown away by the euphoria, the wonderful feeling of being in the crop fields in the summer down in Wiltshire. It's a really magical place. And so many people just got carried away. I remember talking to John Mack in a crop circle, and he said to me, I can believe that people get abducted in the night, but I can't believe that they had the ability to create this crop circle in one night. And I said to him, John, you're not right. This is a man-made crop circle, and I proved it quite clearly.
How were you able to distinguish a man-made versus a UFO one?
Okay, well, the real ones are created by energy, which lays each individual stem one at a time, but incredibly quickly. So you get then what we call a stream bed-like flow, like of a stream, water in a stream, which just flows beautifully. Okay. The man-made formations are made using mechanical devices, such as stomping boards. I've got one in the conservatory. I should have had it handy to show you. It's not mine, by the way. I found it under a hedge near a crop circle that had been made by this particular Dutch team, I think it was. But I thought, oh, this looks good. I'm going to have that. And I never ever made a crop circle, except one tiny one as a demonstration that was only like about 3 feet in diameter, because it was important that we stay clean, if you like, So if the crop is pressed down by a stomping board, it relies on a person putting his foot on the board and taking one step at a time. And each step he takes, he pushes a bunch of stems down to the ground. So you get like waves on the seashore of crop being stomped down, rather than this stream bed like flow. And also in the green crop, where the stomping board hits the stem, after about 12 hours, it creates a white line on the stem. It's a chemical reaction in the plant, which doesn't show up for about 12 hours. And you can see them all in a line. I've counted as many as 20 in a line, you know, which you don't get in the genuine ones. I mean, they tried different methods. They tried rolling barrels in crop circles to stop that mechanical loop to them. But if you have the great good fortune to ever go into a genuine one, and there's very few people have, then it's like you're looking at something very, very special. I was lucky enough to be the first person in what I call the Woodborough Hill hubcap formation from 2001. I think it was early August 2001. It was pristine. It was absolutely beautiful. And you felt as though you were spoiling a Leonardo da Vinci painting. You didn't want to tread in it, but unfortunately you had to in order to examine it properly. But that was completely genuine. And it's only about 2 weeks after that that the famous, what I call the Milk Hill Galaxy formation appeared, which most people have seen who, you know, are interested in this kind of thing. That was an incredible thing. I don't know, 407 separate circles. It was absolutely gigantic. Appeared in one night, and most definitely did appear in one night. Not over a series of nights, you know. So yeah, I've had great times down there. Let me tell you, on one occasion I was down in Wiltshire with Dave Caton, staying in his caravan, which I'd towed down there in my car, staying at a place called Oare, Oare, Hillview Caravan Park, Oare. And we'd been visiting crop circles during the day, and it was night time. And sometime during the night, I must have been taken. And I was taken, I was aware I was in a craft. I was taken to a nearby wood. I won't say exactly where it is, but a nearby wood, because there's an underground ET base there. I say base. It may be a city. We really don't know. All I know is that they go into the ground there and they come out of the ground there because I've filmed them. Okay. And so I was aware of being brought back into the caravan. I was on the craft. I was in a room with a machine of some kind which vibrated my body, and it started off with a low buzzing sound, but it grew in intensity until it sounded as though you got your head inside a beehive, an angry beehive. And about at that point, every atom of your body, I'm guessing, was vibrating. And I reckon it's probably with this method that they're able to pass you through solid material, like in this case, the roof of the caravan. So I found myself then in my bed, and I was wide awake. I could still hear the buzzing, even though I was in the bed. David had woken up, And he said, what's the matter? What's happening? And I told him, and I looked out the window to see if I could see anything, but I couldn't. And the strange thing was that even though we were both really I was agitated, you can imagine, we were both asleep within 10 minutes, I would say. When I woke up the next morning, I went for a shower into the shower block. It was then that I felt my old John Thomas, a little bit of pain there when the hot water hit me. And when I looked, I found that I'd got a cut underneath the foreskin on it, and I also had 2 puncture marks on my stomach, in the kind of area on a woman where the ovaries would be, I guess. And I did actually send you photographs of that, or a photograph of those. So they'd obviously done some work on me while they'd had me there. So that's just one of the occasions I've been taken. And of course, I've had plenty of puncture marks, scoop mark. I've got scoop mark on my leg from being a child, triangle marks. That was another occasion back in about 1990, where I found I was in my bed in this house with Jenny asleep at the side of me, and I found myself being levitated in bed. And this was the first time it had happened to me, as far as I knew, and it was most disconcerting because you have no control, no feeling of control. And I think there's probably a slight bit of paralysis involved as well. So I actually managed to move slightly, and I had it in my mind, if I could just touch Jenny, maybe just with my finger, it might break the spell of whatever's happening. And I did, and I fell back on the bed. So I looked around the room, wondering if there was anybody there, because I knew it was them, but I didn't see anybody. So then I fell asleep, which is quite often the case after these things happen. And the next morning I got in the shower as usual. And again, when the shower hot water hit me, I had pain on my John Thomas. And when I looked, I had a perfect red, just the outline of a red triangle on it. And so once again, I'd been visited. I sent you a photograph, didn't I, of me and young Ben Devereaux. Ben and his brother, his mother and grandmother were all taken as they went out one evening to go to a diner, and they had the experience of being on the craft, and they've been featured on a program called the Real 4400. And the lady's name, the mother, is Rachel Devereaux, if anybody wanted to look that up, that case. But I was up there with my friend Gary from Australia, and I had a trailer tent, and so we were staying in the driveway in the trailer tent. So one afternoon I thought, I'll try and educate them a little bit about what happens. And so I said that, we get these marks on our bodies, and sometimes they stay and sometimes they disappear fairly quickly. And at that time I had this double puncture mark just by my left knee. And so for a bit of fun, we were all rolling our trouser legs up to see if they got anything. And sure enough, Ben had got the identical puncture marks on the inside of his left knee. And so I've sent you those photographs. So I'm kind of assuming that it was the same people who took Ben and his family who have been taking me,
You sent me these interesting photos. I think they look like a cylindrical UFO, but they tend to move in a spirally fashion.
I did send you some. those are they the ones with the white jets?
Yeah. What are
Oh,
those?
okay. Well, those particular ones are not my photographs. They belong to a friend of mine, Carol, who lives in Australia. She has incredible abilities through being taken herself, and her eyesight has been altered so that she can actually see these craft and then deliberately target them with the camera to take the photograph. And so she sent me those pictures. Now, the thing is that I have filmed the identical craft with the cylinder with the jets, which are it seems like they're random. There are two at the front on either side and two at the back on either side. And I don't know whether it's a steering mechanism or what it is, but I've filmed them when I've been filming at locations where I knew there was an underground alien base. These are in England. The first one I discovered was down in Wiltshire, in the Vale of Pewsey. There are several entrances to this base. The base itself may be massive. It may be many miles underground. I really don't know. I can tell you that one of the entrances is by the side of Silbury Hill, near Avebury. If you stand at West Kennet Long Barrow and look at Silbury Hill, you'll see it's actually just slightly to the left, at the left-hand side of the hill, where they come in and they go out. I can't tell you exactly where the other locations are, because on one occasion I was filming there, and you're just out in the countryside. On the face of it, you would never know anything was there, but I knew because I'd seen a UFO go down into the wood at this location with my friend Gary from Australia. I mean, that was an incredible experience in itself, because after we'd seen it go down in the wood, this was about 11 o'clock at night, another craft came up out of the wood, like two big lights, and they were moving side to side in unison. And then they started coming across the field towards us, and they were, it's probably about 200 yards to this wood. When we'd seen I know I'm jumping about a bit here. When we saw the white light, big UFO go down into the wood at this location, when it had done that, suddenly all along the side of the wood, there were little red, blue, and green lights sparkling all the way along the wood. And we were stood outside the car looking across the field at all this. And then these two big lights came up, did this business. And then as they came across the field towards us, obviously the thing was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. At which point, Gary could see that there was like red lights underneath and different stuff. Also, there was red and green lights on this thing, which, of course, aircraft have red and green lights, port and starboard. But my friend Gary is a pilot. And so he knew instinctively that these were on the wrong side of this thing. And besides which, it's only like, I don't know, 100 feet above the field, this thing, as it flies across the field slowly towards us. I took a couple of photographs, actually, but all I got was these two lights. I didn't get anything else. By this time, Gary was panicking. And then I believe we must have had, again, some missing time, because from being right there, I don't know, 75 feet away from us, suddenly it had gone. And we looked across the field towards this little wood we call them a copse over here, COPSE. And what we saw then was an aircraft wing flying on its edge. So the wingtip was towards the ground, and the top of the wing was vertical. And there was no fuselage at all on this wing, but there were two tiny little engines, like a Cessna kind of engine. The wing itself looked like something off a Dakota, from World War II. It even had camouflage pattern on it. And Gary remarked, what a puny sound these engines were making, as it flew in front of the wood, with the wing. I'll bet you the bottom wing was no more than about 15 feet off the ground. It's a completely impossible maneuver for any aeroplane to do anyway. And then it flew right across the face of the wood, and then it flew upwards and over the wood and disappeared. And so it may even have been like a holographic kind of display to mess us up in our minds. I don't know. But all I know was it was 11 o'clock at night, in the middle of nowhere, sort of thing. I was filming that location a few years later. I was on my own. I got my camera set up on the tripod, and this lady came by in a I don't know, small Ford, I think it was, and she got her dog with her, and she parked right next to me, and she wondered what I was doing. Well, first of all, it should be none of her business, because I'm just by the road in the middle of fields, and but I said to her, I'm just filming the lovely countryside around here and a bit of wildlife if I can catch anything. But she knew what I was doing, and she went on to try to stop me to film, and she told me that her husband had worked for the British Secret Service. And so that was just like trying to give me a message. And then she said her son still worked for the British Secret Service. And I said, oh, that's very interesting, but I knew what she was doing. And I don't doubt that she was telling the truth. I'm quite sure that location is monitored all the time. There are probably cameras there that we can't see, in trees and bushes and what have you. Otherwise, why should she have come down? And then after a while, she managed to drive off, and I thought something wrong here. So I very quickly bundled my tripod and camcorder into the back of my car, and I drove off back down the road in the opposite direction. And I just got down to the crossroads, and as I was approaching the crossroads, a police van came round the corner, heading in the direction of where I'd been. So they were obviously onto me. But by this time, he'd come round the corner, and I was able to go off, and I went off up the hill. And but then I went to another location where I know there's a base, and I started filming there. And I was on my own. I parked my car up, and I went into the field and set up, and I'm filming away. And after a little while, maybe about, I don't know, 10 minutes, quarter of an hour, an Apache attack helicopter came up over the wood. This is a different wood, by the way. Dropped down into the field, on the other side of the track where my car was. And I'll bet you it was no more than, I don't know, 25 feet off the ground. And it came up, and it came behind me, and I could see the pilot looking at me. And I've got it all on film. Got it all on film. And it was a bit scary, I'll tell you. This was a bloody black Apache attack helicopter. What the hell was he doing there? He was there because he knew he knew what I was doing, and I know they know who I am because back in, I don't know, in the 90s, I knew my phone was being tapped. And of course, they obviously know the registration number of my car because the helicopter would have taken the reg number of it. So, but I won't say exactly where this base is, because that could just be a pain in the bum for the authorities, and I don't want to do that. But I will tell people generally how to capture these craft, which you've got the photographs from Carol. And the way to do it is to find a likely spot where there have been UFO sightings, perhaps. Also, ancient sites are very often places where you'll find them. Like Stonehenge, Avebury, Stone Circle, and all you have to do is to get a decent camcorder, put it on the tripod, and film pieces of film of that location, but include the sky and the location as well, so you've got some reference points. And I suggest filming not more than about a minute at a time. And if you get maybe 10 films of that kind of locate around that area, and then you download that film onto your laptop and you play it back on one of the free programs where you can slow it down to 10% of the normal speed. Bear in mind, these craft are traveling usually at a minimum of 1,000 miles an hour. So even if you slow it down by 10%, down to 10%, it's still traveling at 100 miles an hour. So you've got to look carefully at the film. So 1 minute of film, you're sitting in front of the laptop, carefully looking for these things. So 1 minute of film amounts to 10 minutes of serious concentration to spot these things. And then you can freeze frame and take photographs. And if you're quick enough, you can take several photographs showing the path of these craft.
David, you sent me a really interesting photo, a few photos when you did a little trip with friends to a burial chamber.
Oh yes, yes indeed. Well, that was I don't know, a couple of years ago now, I think. We went to Tinkins Wood Burial Chamber. My friends David and Linda and myself. And I didn't get a good feeling as I walked up towards it. And the burial chamber, it's the largest capstone in Wales, perhaps probably in this country. I think it weighs, I'm not sure, 40 tons, something like that. But the chamber itself is open at the front and on one side. So you could go inside if you wanted to, but I felt strongly that there was something not good about this place. So I was walking around and looking at the place. Linda was talking to a couple of other people there, and David was talking to another chap. Now, as I told you earlier on, David is incredibly psychic, it has these amazing abilities. And so while I'm walking around, he could see that there was a man following me everywhere I went. And it was a fairly tall man. He had a pink shirt on. And David thought that I'd made a new friend, which we often do when we visit these sites. And so after we did actually make friends with three people, a man and his wife and a friend of theirs. So there were six of us originally. And so so David saw this man follow me around everywhere. And then before we all left the burial chamber site, David said, I want a photograph of us all as a memory, you know. So we stood in line, and the man in the pink shirt apparently stood right behind me. And David took the photograph. And then he said, I want to be on the photograph also. So another gentleman volunteered to take a picture who'd already had his photo taken. And so Dave got in the line with us, and he looked across at this man in the pink shirt, and he smiled at him, and he smiled back at him. And then that was it as far as we were concerned. Just as we were about to leave, David turned to myself and Linda and said, who was that chap in the pink shirt that was following you around? A new friend you've made, Robert? And I looked at Linda, and she looked at me, and no, there was nobody in a pink shirt following me around. Well, he could not believe it. This person was so clear to David. He felt like going back and having a good look, because he almost didn't believe us. So fortunately, just as we were about to leave, he took a photograph of the sign, the Tinkinswood burial chamber. But it just happened that in the photograph, he's got trees behind and a little bit of the sky. And when we closely examined that photograph, there's a UFO just there. And I later learned from Pat that that indeed I had a friend with me, that there was a what shall we say, an evil spirit, something not very nice in the chamber that was determined it was going to attach to me. And my friend in the UFO was determined that it wasn't going to attach to me. And so it turns out in one of the photographs that I've sent you, that behind me, where this chap was standing, you can't see him, but there's an indication of an archway which is obscuring the power lines from the main power line in the field there. And Pat informed me that this was a portal which they create in order to transfer themselves from the craft into our physical reality in some way. I can't say that I understand it, but you can quite clearly see that there is a portal there, a gateway, if you like. And I later, and of course, and Pat did tell me, oh yes, it's your friend T-Day. That's his name, and he's a very special person indeed. And he calls me little brother. Wow. So it is. It's wonderful to know that I have friends in high places. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, actually, that goes to another story, if you would like me to tell you, about when I went to Australia. Yeah, back in 2008. I sent you pictures of that Eric Thomason had taken of the craft at Maslin Beach. Those are the best pictures available in anywhere in the world, and they made it possible for me to get them. I can guarantee you that, because when I met Eric himself at his home in Maslin Beach, I discovered that his big prints had been stolen by people pretending to be part of a UFO group who visited him. Okay. Well, there were probably something to do with the Australian Secret Service, because what actually happened was that the negatives of the film were borrowed by his then son-in-law on the pretext that he wanted to get copies for himself. And when he fetched the negatives back, they were all scratched. It turned out that he worked in the military, the son-in-law. He blamed it on the developers, that it was their fault. But I guarantee you that was deliberate, so that he couldn't make any more copies. So all that Eric had when I visited him with my friend Gary were little tiny postcard things, this big, which were not much better than what was already out there on the web, But anyway, a few days later, we went. Gary decided that it would be a good idea to go and call on an old friend of his. Gary's a hand glider pilot, one of the first in Australia. He's crazy. He's a crazy man. He does. I filmed him off Jarvis Point doing the loops in an old hang glider. It's crazy, absolutely crazy. But he suddenly had the idea that he wanted to go and see an old friend of his, hang gliding pal, who he'd not seen for several years. And this just came to him out of the blue, this idea. So I said, yeah, well, okay, let's go and see him. So we went to see him, and we said during the conversation that we'd been to see Eric, and about the Maslin Beach UFO. When he said, hang on a minute, he said, I think I've got some prints of that somewhere. And he looked and he found the 4 prints in a magazine rack, and in a plastic bag. Now, these had been in his house while he was building the house. So they'd got a tiny little bit fogged, a little bit of brown spotting on them, but still they were terrific. So these were first generation copies. So I got him to scan them and send them to me by email, and then I've got them, and through me they've come out to the wider world again. But all I'm trying to tell you is that they're absolutely genuine. I've been to Maslin, to Oka Point, where Eric went that morning to take photographs of the sunrise, and where the craft came up out of the sea. And the craft came over him and dripped water on his head. He was quite scared at this point, and ducked down into the bushes. And then a smaller craft. I mean, the big one was, Eric reckoned it was 100 feet in diameter, and the smaller one, I think he said 30 feet. Yeah, it's in the report I sent to you anyway, about 30 feet in diameter. And in the first photograph of the originals, you can see it in the sky, this tiny little dot and it's coming into rendezvous with the big one that's come up out of the sea. And in the other photographs, you can see it come in, go underneath the big craft, which creates like a landing platform out of light, which comes from these usually have 3 big lights underneath the craft, which are used for propulsion, but they can operate on 2 while they're doing something with the other one. George Adamski talked about this many years ago, and so it created a platform for this 30-foot one to come in and get onto, and then tractor beams from the big craft hook onto this small one, and it went up and melded, if you like, with the big craft. And Eric, who had been in engineering all his life, said he'd never seen anything quite like it. It was seamless. And then within 3 seconds, it had shot. He reckoned it would be in space. So it's absolutely genuine, even though an attempt has been made to rubbish those photographs. But I absolutely guarantee Eric was a World War II fighter bomber pilot. He fought all the way through the war, flying Hurricanes, Spitfires, whirlwinds, tempests, typhoons. He was a hero. Got shot down, injured. I have his memoirs, which is one of my most treasured possessions, which he signed for me. Yeah, it was worth traveling to Australia. But following on from that and going back to T-Day again, I know I'm jumping about here, but here we go. I did an interview with the ABC radio network in Australia, in Adelaide, at their big studios in Adelaide, and broadcasting live to Australia and taking questions on crop circles. And it was also done to publicize a talk that I was giving in Adelaide at the time, or a few days later. So I did the talk, and this strange, unusual looking chap came to the talk, and he looked like he was in his 30s, athletic build, bald head, and he sat near the window by the door. And you could see he was uneasy in that room with all those people. But he listened while I gave the talk. And during the talk, somebody asked me what I thought the purpose of the crop circles was. And so I said that I had supportive evidence, if you like, that the genuine ones are made to infuse energy into the ley line energy system, the world energy system. And I said, I have evidence that without that energy, all life on the planet would die. And I have corroborated, because one of my abilities is that I can feel energy with my hands. So I can feel auras around people. I can feel energy lines in the ground, energy coming from standing stones, all that kind of thing. And when we first arrived at Avebury for the crop circle research, a couple of weeks, I went to the big stones, the cove stones, as they call them, and felt the energy, and it was very low. I could hardly feel anything. Anyway, about a week later, I went back again, and the energy was so strong that it was vibrating my body. And I could only stand it for about a minute before I had to. It was like standing in front of big speakers at a rock concert or something, that vibrating effect, And So I knew that there'd been a massive influx of energy into the system. And several days later, I was at the Crop Circle Cafe, where all us croppies met. And there was a chap came in who with a load of honey, which the owner of the shop, Charlie Mallet, he would sell the honey for him, and get a cut. You see, so I started talking to this beekeeper, and he said it's been a strange year so far. The summer was quite nice, the spring was nice, but the bees didn't produce much honey at all. But this last week, they've suddenly gone berserk, and they've produced loads and loads and loads of honey. And I didn't tell him, but I said, excuse me, I said, I know why. It's because they've been lifted by the energy, and it probably affects the plants as well, to increase their yield of pollen. So getting back to Australia, so this is what I said, that the crop circles, the genuine ones, allow for energy to be infused into the ley line system. So then the end of the talk came. Several people wanted to talk to me and tell me about their experiences, which is always very interesting. It's probably the best part for me of any event. But this chap was still there, and he waited patiently. Then he came up to me, and all he said was, "You're right about the crop circles, and the different patterns allow different frequencies of energy to be infused." Okay. But then he stood in front of me, and with his right hand, he took my left hand and held it out. Then he started to connect with the energy, like so, making a circle, if you like, a crop circle on the palm of my hand, and I could feel it. Then he moved that energy up my arm and back down again, which I suppose is what happens with the crop circle energy. It gets moved by the ley lines, doesn't it? Then he started to tease the energy off the ends of my fingers like this with his right hand. With his left hand, he was moving the energy across my solar plexus towards my left hand. Okay. Then all of a sudden, bear in mind, I'm used to feeling energy. The energy level shot up. It was like 100 times more than anything I've ever felt. And I knew instinctively that he could feel this too, and that this was a merging of our auras. And I just looked at him and I smiled, a massive beaming smile, because I knew who he was. He was not a normal human being, and he smiled back at me, and I sent him a message telepathically, saying, don't worry about the other people in the room. I would never betray you to them, because one of them was an ex-CIA guy who worked at Cheyenne Mountain on the NASA space shots. So I wasn't going to betray my friend to him. Nice chap though he was, So with that, my friend, who I later discovered was actually T-Day, the same one who came and helped me at Tinkins Wood, he just turned around, never said another word, walked straight out of the building. And it was amazing, incredible. It was lovely to meet a human extraterrestrial, if you like.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
It must have felt really good after that.
Oh, it was just one of the most amazing feelings in my entire life. I know Pat tells me that they keep a very close eye on me. T-Day has a very famous brother, and apparently we're all connected very closely, and that's a guy who lived about 2,000 years ago, who everybody knows.
Yeah. Okay.
And I've had the experience of merging with his body. On one occasion, I came out of my body in my bed. He was floating above me, horizontally, merged with his body. Just incredible. I don't remember a thing of what happened, but the following morning, I was completely shattered. Completely shattered. I got up, had a shower, got dressed, stood by my bed. I felt as if I could just get straight back into bed with my clothes on. I was so tired. So yeah, I know I have wonderful, wonderful friends. Yeah.
Can you talk about your involvement with the Capel Green movie?
Yes, well, the Capel Green movie is all about the Rendlesham Forest incident, as we call it. You know, at the US AAF base at Bentwaters. I became friendly with Larry Warren, who you may know. Many people may know Larry. I like Larry very much. We're good friends. And I believe what he says is the truth, without a shadow of a doubt. How can I explain this one? So I met Larry at the Leeds UFO conference at the Leeds University, which was run every year. It was a wonderful event, massive event. And I remember on this occasion, we missed one of the talks. It was a good talk, but I had the opportunity to speak with Larry, and so we sat out of the talk. We stood on the balcony and we stood talking about our experiences throughout our lives. And it turns out that Larry's had a lot more experiences than just the Rendlesham Forest case, you know, which are probably a lot of people don't realize, you know. So yeah, he's been involved all his life, just like me. So Larry is one of the main witnesses to the Capel Green film. You know, he saw the UFO, he saw the beings. Colonel Holt, Charles Holt, denies some of what Larry says, but I know Larry, he's telling the truth, and Charles is doing what he has to do, I guess. But I've met Charles Holt as well. I shared a microphone with Charles back in, I don't know, mid-90s at Todmorden. He'd been talking, and then I just was bursting to stand up and tell them all in the audience about my encounter, 28th December 1980. And so I did. And so, yeah, so I've met a lot of people in this game, you know.
Yeah. That's fun, really.
Yeah.
Oh,
so how can I explain it? So the guy who's doing the Capel Green film, producing it and making it, is a friend of Larry's, and he also films some of the UFO conferences at oh crikey, the big UFO conferences we have over here. And so I've met him there, and I've been interviewed by him there. And on one occasion, this is another aspect of me, which I'll go into if you like. I'm also a shapeshifter. Okay, as if all this isn't enough. no wonder my wife was scared of the whole damn business. I have at least a dozen people on different occasions who see me change my appearance. I don't do it deliberately. It just happens. And it's always an ET of some kind. Sometimes it's the normal grey type being. Other times, on one occasion, I do know for sure it was a reptilian being.
What happens?
My face changes. My face changes. Sometimes, on one occasion, I do know it was just half my face. Oh, crikey, I haven't got the book handy. Yeah, is that it? Yeah, like that.
Oh,
Okay.
mhm.
Beyond My Wildest Dreams, Kim Carlsberg.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
So that's what happens. Yeah, several witnesses, not just single witnesses, 2 or 3 witnesses at the same time to it happening. And I know several other people that it happens to as well. You know, some really good people. One's a doctor. Yeah, others a famous author whose name I won't mention. Yeah. On one occasion, I was at this conference, the UFO conference. I was in the audience. I was getting a bit bored, to be honest with you. The speakers, they were okay, but they weren't very interesting. And I thought, this is getting really boring. If I could just change for a minute, that would shake the audience up. You know, if I could change my visage, and so I was concentrating. I thought, come on, you can do it, Rob. I'd never done it before, but anyway, I nothing seemed to happen, and so the speaker finished speaking. I went up to the front, and I was speaking to the guy who's making the Capel Green film, because we've become very friendly, and he was looking at me. And he said, all of a sudden, he said, Rob, your eyes changed. Your right eye, I think it was, the pupil is going from top to bottom, like a lizard's eye or a cat's eye. Okay. So he said, hang on a minute. So he went and got his best camera, and he's got some really good equipment, believe me. And he took a photograph of it, and he showed it me on the back of the camera. And he could see quite clearly that the pupil in that eye was going straight from the top to the bottom. And he's still got that photograph. Oh. So it does happen, you know. As I say, I've met several ETs, the little greys. My first talk I ever gave was a spiritualist church in Stockport back in 2000. And I was nervous, and I'd made some notes. But soon after starting, I thought, I don't need these notes. So I just spoke for an hour or so. After the talk, one of the ladies in the audience was a medium. And she came up to me after it had finished, and she said, I have to speak to you. And she got permission for us to sit in the main body of the church after everybody had gone. And she said, I have to tell you that you were not on your own up there on the platform. There were 3 or 4 little grey sort of people with big eyes around you. There was one who was much taller than you, standing right behind you, and there was a triangle-shaped object above your head, and they were using the triangle to influence your thoughts to help you to give the talk. Okay? Oh, and she said another thing, they were calling you brother. and they were very pleased indeed with what
Yeah,
you
I'm
were
getting
doing.
chills.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
So that was my first definite encounter with my friends there. I've had them in the caravan down in Wiltshire when I've been down with David and Gary. On one occasion, David and Gary were there. We were all three of us there chatting all day. You know what we like when we get talking about these things. It can go on for hours, can't it? And at the end, it must have been about 9 o'clock in the evening. And Gary said, "I've got to go, otherwise I'll get locked out of the place where I'm staying." So we were in a field on a site, but the main gate was locked at that time. So we knew where the key was. It was buried in a jar by the side of the gate, but Gary didn't know. So one of us had to go out and open the gate so that he could drive out, you see. So so Dave volunteered to do it. And I was pleased because I was bursting for a pee. And so as soon as they'd gone out the door, I went in the toilet in the caravan. I'm stood there having a pee, and I hear these feet running up and down inside the caravan. And I thought, what the heck's Dave doing back at this time? He's only just gone. And besides, it doesn't sound like Dave at all. You know, they were just little feet pattering up and down inside the caravan. So anyway, sure enough, when I came out of the toilet, Dave wasn't there. There was nobody there. And Dave came back about 5 minutes later. Well, the next morning, Gary arrived again. And he said, "Rob," he said, "something really strange happened last night. When Dave and I went out into the field and we walked up the field, as I got further up the field, I felt compelled to come back down the field as if I'd left something in the caravan, maybe like my mobile phone or something. So I came back down the field, and as I came down the field, I could hear somebody running up and down inside the caravan. And and then he thought, no, that can't be. And then he realized he hadn't forgotten anything at all. So he went back up, got in his car, and drove off home. But it's quite obvious to me that they put that thought in his head so that he would come back down the field and be a witness to what I had heard on my own as I was standing in the toilet, you know. Mm. Now, that particular night, David and I got in our separate beds, you know, in the caravan. And I lay down, and it seemed fairly quickly I got a face of an ET right in front of me, right there, you know. And it's the same face, more or less, that's on the Communion book by Whitley Strieber. You know, that face with the big eyes and the pointed chin. And he looked at me, and I looked back at him. It felt like a male. And it didn't feel like a threat at all, even though he was so close. I got the impression that the kind of message that he was sending me was, are you okay with this? Can you look at me and be okay? You know? And I looked back at him, and I said in my mind, I said, yes, I'm okay. I'm happy with this. No problem. And then the next thing I knew, I was asleep. And it was the next morning. So that was another different type of ET that I've seen. The most recent one I saw was what we call a chitta uri, which is the same. It's a reptilian species that lives underground. It's well known in South Africa. The Sangoma, wise man, Credo Mutwa, talked to David Icke about seeing these beings. And the Credo has actually painted one of these beings. And in the interview he gives with David Icke, the painting is right behind him. And as I looked at the painting, I can see it's exactly the same type of being that stood at the side of my bed not quite 4 years ago. And I can describe that being ever so well because I looked at him for quite a while. And it felt like a he. It felt like a warrior kind of being, really. It had the skull showed me that it had round orbits to the eyes, but the eyelids were slanted upwards like this, and the bottom eyelid moved as well as the top, rather like a lizard's eyelids do. It had three very, I'd say three very deep wrinkles on the bridge of the nose here, which if you screw your nose up like that, you can get wrinkles there, can't you? Well, these were permanent and they were very, very deep indeed. The being had no hair, and on the top of the head, going from, I don't know, back to front or front to back, there's a raised ridge of bone, I guess, part of the skull shape. And that is exactly what they look like. He was only partly materialized because I first knew he was there because he was tugging the bedclothes on the side of the bed to get my attention. So I thought, hello, I've got a visitor, have I? And my head was, I was lying on my stomach looking the other way. And so as I turned towards him, I realized I was moving in slow motion. And so as I did so, I could see his head and just his shoulders, perhaps. So the rest of him must have been through the ceiling and down here in the living room, I'm guessing, because he was only partly materialized, you see. And then he spoke to me telepathically, the most clear telepathic communication I've ever had. And he said, the time has come for you to know more of the truth. And I thought, great, I've been trying to find the answers to all these things for 40 years, to finally know what's really going on would be great. So I thought, right, let's have it, But next thing I knew, it was morning. And I didn't remember a damn thing of what he'd told me, if he told me anything. But a day or two later, I found that I had a pain in the crown of my head here. And it was very, very tender. And days after that, I started to feel that my skull was changing, and I started to get a ridge on the top of my head. Now, it wasn't huge, but my head was flat before, and now there's a very definite ridge in the middle. Thank God it hasn't carried on growing. My friend David, who lives in Newport, who we seem to get the same things happen to us. He gets marks, I get marks, same thing. I said to him, I rang him up. I said, Dave, have you had, is your head tender on top? And he put his hand on his head. Yeah, it is. It is. I said, you've not got a ridge sort of growing on top of your head? Bloody hell, he said, yes, I have. And his grew more than mine. And so that when he went to the hairdressers, he had to warn them to be careful with the comb because it was tender. So I don't know. What does this mean? Am I related to the Chitauri or the Greys or reptilians or all of them? have I lived lives as any of these beings in the past? Probably, I think. Back in the 1990s, I remember driving along in the car in Macclesfield with my wife at the side of me, and I would suddenly see in front of me where the interior mirror was, rear view mirror, I would see writing. And the writing was a list of the laws of the galaxy. And I could read them. And I knew them. That was the strange thing. I knew them. And this happened on several occasions. It's not happened for many years, but it's as if, I'm and on other occasions, I've spent a normal day. I've come home. I've been sitting thinking about what's happened to me during that day. And then I realized I didn't do any of those things, but they appeared to be my memories, as if I was living a parallel life somewhere. They were just as real to me as my actual memories of what I had done that day. And this happened several times. Oh, it's most disconcerting,
Yeah. Now, do you have any other stories that you might want to get into, or perhaps a closing statement?
Oh, crikey. Well, I mean, yes, Beata would never forgive me if I didn't tell you about the miracle healing. This happened in Wiltshire, in the same field, strangely enough, where the caravan was when the little feet were up and down in the caravan. But it was a year or two later, and I was in my what we call a dandy trailer tent, and it's a trailer, and it opens up, a double bed on that side, sink unit and doors and all that kind of thing. Well, I was down there with Gary, my friend from Australia, and my friends David and Linda, and two other friends, Mary and Tanya, who lived in Wiltshire. They decided to visit us. So the six of us were there together. And it was so nice, the six of us, because we've all been taken. So it's like brothers and sisters, we don't have to explain anything to them because they already know. It's a lovely feeling being together with your own people, if you like. So during the day, we'd been to Avebury, and we were walking round by the stones at Avebury. And I was with Mary, and she said to me how much she admired me. And for a split second, I made the mistake of feeling pride, if you like. And that's not me. I believe in having very little ego, if possible. So that's what happened. So later in the day, I only had that feeling for seconds before I stopped myself, kicked myself. You shouldn't do that, So we came back to the dandy trailer tent, and we're all sat inside, and I suddenly decide to make a cup of tea for everybody on the stove in the trailer tent. And the milk, we didn't have a freezer or whatever to keep the milk cool, so I kept it underneath the dandy in the shade. I didn't have a step either to step down onto. I was wearing sandals, that's all. So I had no support. I didn't know it, but horses had been in that field during the winter, and the grass was a little long. But the horse hoof prints were still in the grass. I put my left foot out and went down. My foot went into one of these prints, and it went over, and I snapped my ankle, and it was like a gun going off, and I fell on my back onto the grass. But as I was falling, it was like time was standing still. And as I fell, I had enough time to think of the words, "Pride goes before a fall." Okay? So I hit the ground. I knew I'd done something very, very serious. But I just gave myself up to it. It had happened. Whatever happens now is just going to happen. I'm just going to go with the flow of it, you know? So David looked out of the door, and he saw me lying on the floor. He saw that I'd got a compound fracture of my lower leg and ankle. The bone was sticking through my leg, and there was blood on the grass. But standing in a ring all around me were ETs. And they were there instantly. And so his immediate impulse was to come out to me straight away. But he didn't feel as though he could. He had to wait until they gave him the okay. So he came out, and they parted for him so he could get to me. And he felt my leg further up to see if I'd broken anything more. I hadn't. So he didn't know what the heck he was going to do. He is a healer, but this was a bit beyond his normal abilities. So he said, somebody or something came into his body, and he said he was compelled to take my ankle in his hands. And he said the blood was coming through the fingers onto his hand. And fingers that weren't his that were in his body began to push the bones back into place. And as he looked at his hands, he could see the blood going back off his palms and going back into the wound. At this time, Linda had come out, and she'd put her hands on top of his, because she's also very special too. But what shocked Dave even more was the fact that my face was changing more than it's ever done. And the face that I changed into shocked even my friend David, who's seen it many times. It was a very old, grey-skinned being. The skin was extremely wrinkled, like an elephant's skin. My eyes were big and round. He said they were extremely dark blue. If you didn't look carefully, you might have thought they were black, but they weren't. And when Dave saw me changing, he actually jumped back a little bit in surprise at this face. But then he carried on. And then gradually, and in fact, he said, "No, Rob, no, don't do it now. There are other people here, you know." But I'd no control over these things, you know. And when he took his hands off my ankle, there was no blood on the grass, and no bone sticking through or anything like that. They helped me back into the dandy and lay me on the bed. And within about 4 or 5 days, I was driving my car with a and it had a heavy clutch. It was a manual gearbox, heavy clutch. There was more to that story as well, because as we sat in the dandy, 3 pairs of us, me and Gary, David and Linda, Mary and Tanya. Gary, who's a very clever guy, suddenly felt compelled to count us. And he said, "Isn't it great that we're all here together? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of us." And we all kind of looked, and Dave said, "No, Gary, there's only 6." And of course, but then Dave said, "Actually, you're right. There's another person here, and this person is here to help Robert." So there were 7, and somehow Gary had been able to see that person. And then that night, as we lay in our beds, Gary and me, eventually I got tired and said, I've got to go to sleep, Gary, because he's worse than me at talking, which is hard to believe, but I know. But I said, I've got to go to sleep. I'm very, very tired. And I closed my eyes. But as soon as I closed my eyes, I opened them and I could see that there was somebody at the bottom of my bed over my ankle. And that person had long red hair. And I knew it was my cousin, Brenda, who died a few years ago. She'd been a healer in this life. And she was obviously still a healer on the other side. So, and Gary heard a voice from near the door, and the voice said to him, you've got to say this to Robert. And Gary said, no, he'll be annoyed if I say anything to him now. But this person repeated that 3 times. And the last time Gary said, okay, I'll do it. And so Gary said, Rob, he said, I'm very sorry, but I have to tell you this. And it doesn't make any sense. All I've got to tell you is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I said to him, Gary, it makes perfect sense. That 7th person is with me right now, giving me healing on my ankle.
Oh.
And so with that, I suppose that's my final message, that we're never alone in this life, even when we think we are. And we have wonderful friends in high places.
Oh my God, that's so beautiful. I love healing stories. They're the best.
They are, aren't they? Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
I feel very privileged, and I'm very, very grateful that I have these beings in my life. I'm not afraid of any of them, and I hope that's a message that this interview might convey to people, that they don't really, mostly they don't mean there's any harm. There are a few that aren't so good, but the majority are wonderful beings, full of love.
That's what I always tell people, that most of my experiences are positive, and most of those that I've interviewed had positive experiences as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been
Robert,
it's a great pleasure. Great pleasure.
It's been fun.
And the journey hasn't ended yet. It's ongoing.
I'd like to give thanks to Pat Jackson for making this possible too.
Yes, indeed.
Pat. And
yes.
So thank you so much again for coming on. And to those watching, hope you enjoyed today's interview. I sure did. I'm your host, Mr. Great. More interviews coming up, and I'll see you guys next time. So take care, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Great, and thanks for watching today's episode. If you are an abductee, contactee, or experiencer, and you believe that your story could help others, please feel free to contact me through my YouTube channel email. When it comes to experiencers, the ET phenomena, and the future, remember, truth will out.